Good evening, everyone. My name is Fayaz Yassin, and I come from Accountability Lab. I welcome you all to the 2024 Bay of Bengal conversation. The topic we are going to discuss today is about accountability in the development. How can we make development process more citizen-centric? And I have with me two distinguished speakers, Dr. Abdullah Mamoon and Makhate Mase. Um, to begin our session, I would like both of our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves so that we can get into our discussion. Dr.
Fayaz, thank you so much. And it's my privilege to speak in such a session. I'm Dr. Abdullah Mamoon. I'm a faculty member of University of Dhaka. And also I represent a think tank called Pan Asia Research Institute. I'm the executive director there. Apart from that, I also work in one of the leading think tanks here called SANEM, who works mostly on the economic affairs. So thank you so much.
Okay, so thank you. My name is Makhate Makamasi. I'm from the University of Pretoria. This is in South Africa, and I'm also a researcher with the Center for Mediation in Africa.
So the accountability of development projects has always been, they have always generated an interesting debate. Generally, we have seen that governments, they come up with projects, development projects in the name of fighting poverty, in the name of building infrastructure, in the name of facilitating citizens. But how, to what extent those projects truly represent the aspirations and needs and demands of the people in the names of who these projects are started and initiated. Taking today's opportunity, I would really like both of our speakers to probably begin by unpacking the concept of citizen-centered development. Why do we mean by it? What do we mean by it, and how do they look like? Professor Abdullah, if you could share your thoughts around it.
Yeah, I mean, by methodology, they emphasize that need to meet the expectation and right of the people and work for the life of the people, both in terms of economy, both in terms of inequality, and of course, facilitating to improve their life. Another thing I think is very important that we talk about the people, but end of the day, whether we address the people of all classes, people of all groups, that is also important. So when it comes to defining the term people-centric, that should not only include the economic aspect, but also the inclusion of people of diverse group, the people who are in inequality, they are addressed, and also the environmental factor, the gender factor, all are embedded in this package of people-centric approach. Another thing I think is very important to understand when you talk about the people-centric project management is the involvement of the people, not only from the inception, but also from pre-inception, from the white paper, from the green paper, and then moving forward to the design of the project and also the management of the project. But unfortunately, when we talk about the development project, most of the cases, these elements are dropped. Thereby, it's an evolving concept. Starting from 1950s, but still it is evolving. That is the unfortunate part. But as I said, that it should include everything, all the aspects of the development.
So this is important point, and I would really like you to unpack it. When the government looks at people, a targeted beneficiary group, they tend to look at them as one big homogeneous group of people. How can they ensure, of course, when they have the appetite for including them into those development projects, how could they ensure that intersectionality is truly represented in its approach when it's, conceiving development projects or managing it, as you said, or sort of, concluding them?
So I think there are two ways theoretically. If I just say that, firstly, by including beneficiaries in the design, implementation, monitoring, and most importantly, in the result outcome, the result framework. And secondly, by ensuring that the projects forego the space of engagement when it is going on. It should involve the people of all courses in the decision making, and also they can raise their voice whether the projects are implemented in the right direction with the right objective. And particularly the TOR, it has agreed with the local partners or the development partners that are being achieved through the monitoring and evaluation of the people who are targeted for this development. I think these two factors are very important.
Makhate, turning to you, when people are not heard, and their sort of, their input or their feedback is not included into the development projects, it doesn't go down very well with them. They the community ownership that the government should inspire for, it's not always visible. It might sort of instigate a kind of conflict within those communities. How do you think that that conflict could be avoided? For example, how the governments could ensure that the communal ownership of those development projects is actually there. What are your thoughts around it?
Very interesting. So I think for me, consultation is very important. It goes hand in hand. Have a consultative process, and like Prof said, from the before, in conceptualizing whatever project it is that has to be rolled out, you have to consult what it is that their needs are in order for you to actually, frame. So how I am thinking about responses people when things aren't relevant. I think one way to mitigate this is for governments to have a consultative process. Understand that whatever it is that has to be for the people has to be informed by them. And their needs can only be understood when they are consulted. And therefore, it is really ensuring that you prioritize their voices and their needs, and that can only be informed by them, even if it has to bring you coming to the grassroots level, consulting, whether it is door to door, like if it's going to be quite practical. I think it's either then perhaps fleshing out what participation means at that level, and then, I guess from the feedback.
So both of you have highlighted the importance of consulting with the people. How to go about doing that, because in most of the developing countries, the formal mechanisms through which these consultations could happen, they do not exist. At best, what we see is civil society organizations going out and speaking to the people, but civil society organizations, their role is not always liked by the governments, which sort of, which pursue these development projects. What are some of the mechanisms, proven mechanisms that governments could deploy to ensure that people's voices are heard into the development projects?
You see, when we talk about the people-centric management of the project, which you are talking about, the after inception, how all the stakeholders should act, behave, and contribute to the process so that ultimately the project objectives are achieved and change the life of the people. That is the ultimate motto of any people, regardless the economic project, environmental project, anything else. Therefore, we say that people's engagement means they're just a passive beneficiary enjoying the benefit. Rather, they should be active participant. That is the main issue when you talk about the people-centric project management or people-centric project. Secondly, you see, when I was talking a moment ago that the people planning, when you start planning a project, people voice should be adhered. And secondly, the approach should be inclusive. And thirdly, that whether it is ensuring equality or creating any discrimination to other people, that is also part of the equality process or the people-centric management. And most importantly, you should not only focus on the national framework, but how the project fit in with the human right, which international frameworks such as OECD or even the other organization, like if it is a project of World Bank, they also include the human right component, the natural conservation component, the risks and threat to other parties. So how do you ensure that the only way you can do it, in fact, including people who you are working for? So by this way, you can do the people's participation in project management. However, what you say that unfortunately, in many cases, both the government as well as development partner, they disregard and they focus more on the project implementation. And by that way, we get some outcomes. We can see some visible change, or we can see a project. But how that output is converted to outcomes, that always a bigger question in the development fraternity. I think if that both the government, development partner, always remember that there's framework locally and internationally. And not only the output, but also outcome should be achieved, then this problem can be addressed.
Generally the governments, they get away by establishing a toll-free number, on which people could call and provide feedback, on the development projects. That's one mechanism, which are generally non-responsive, Or people could go online and fill out forms, which are essentially in English language, and it's, whether those people speak good English or understand English as a language or not, those kind of barriers. What could be other tools, which...
I think it is very important knowing your constituency. And that, of course, will entail understanding if it is literacy or linguistic limitations, how you go around those. And therefore, that will also inform the approach that you take when you're trying to have participation, people participation in whatever process. And so I think for a practical model, for instance, door-to-doors are something that is a traditional model. You can, if you employ it in political campaigns, because during elections, this is one of the strategies that you employ. And this is literally an old age strategy and a tool that is available, very practical. You get there, you probably will be speaking in the language that they understand. This is participation in I think. One other way, we have what's community gatherings. In different spaces, there are key stakeholders that are able to pull people together, discuss an issue, if it is perhaps concerning a community or whatever it is that might be perhaps from the government to call. We call them Imbizo, but it's essentially what it's called, like bringing people together to come discuss an issue. That is also a model that can be, I think, explored. But equally, we also live in an age that is somewhat advancing in terms of technology. And we have a younger population now that is somewhat tech savvy, more present on social media. And I think in some processes, this is a form of participation and consultation where people can also submit through different forms of medium. Is it social media? Is it Facebook, Twitter? Capturing,
of course,
your sentiments, capturing their views. That's also part of it, right? And so, I think...
Can I compliment just quickly? This is another way or modality, if you look at the history of development and project implementation, particularly in last 1 decade. It's a very popular term and narrative has been developed around it, the development results framework. So any project, regardless introduced by the government or along with the development partner or development partner itself, we call that if the development result framework is outlined well, putting questions such as, is the project tackling the root cause or problem, or is just a manifestation of something?
Yes.
Secondly, what we believe that should be considered as a question, have the people who are vulnerable situation, are they left behind because of the implementation of the
inclusion.
project? It's inclusion. Secondly, is the project seeking or addressing the discrepancies? Third, and most importantly, the project address the inequality issue. And I think finally, a few questions are also there that sustainable. How is about the sustainability of the project? Or just one goal, build a school building, and then you leave. That's collapse. What is the sustainability mechanism? So if you can tick off this thing, and in summary, if it is your result framework is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time bound. So there is truly fits in with the people-centric approach.
We are talking about a lot of jargons. I really want to sort of point fingers towards the elephant in the room. In the countries with the colonial hangover, which are quite a lot, about 70, 80 countries around the world, and they make a bulk of the developing countries in the world. The bureaucracy believes that they are the true experts, when a project needs to be conceived, when a project needs to be built, when a project needs to be delivered. They think that poor people, they are illiterate. They don't understand the technical, dynamics of particular initiative. Their voice or their feedback or input is not extremely relevant. It's uninformed, uneducated, those kind of things. And that kind of thinking, how can we convince? And then, of course, there are financial incentives and political incentives to take on to various development projects, because various governments, they really want to sell those projects to their constituencies, when election comes. And between all of these, the relevance of those projects to the needs of the communities, they are sort of, they are lost. And also sometimes there is this reverse convincing, where the political masters tell the people that you need a road and not a school,
Yeah.
probably,
Perhaps, yeah.
that reverse convincing also happens. What would you suggest both for the citizens and the civil society organizations, how to navigate those situations, how to establish your credibility as a technical expert organization or citizen, and what sort of enables you or sort of gives you the credibility to speak about those issues on part of the citizen? What could be some of the ways to do that?
I think it's a
Sorry, Makhater.
Makhater, go ahead.
So, as you put it, the elephant in the room, the reality of, I think, post-colonial communities and societies is really that you have a very fragmented space, whether we are talking about the civil society organizations that are supposed to somewhat galvanize agency to at least have somewhat relevant solutions that translate into the improved lives of the people, right?
Yeah.
But I think we're also grappling with a power dynamic where it is government and politicians that inform or give solutions without necessarily ensuring that a root cause of an issue is addressed, dealing with the symptoms. That's where you will find someone bringing a road when there's a need for a school. You're seeing that there is a gap here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for progress, and we are increasingly trying to understand that there are actors somewhat that either impede and work towards maintaining status quo,
Yeah,
because it perhaps even benefits them to an extent.
it does.
And so they are probably not in the best position to work with you because probably they're not trying to work with you. It's not within their economic, financially best interest
Yeah.
to have some issues addressed, right? But I think this is where I think I jotted down legitimacy when you spoke on credibility. The legitimacy of our actors is very important, and I think this is where, but equally, the root of this problem is also at the grassroots level. How are we informing or choosing or electing representatives? Representation then I think comes relevant. And navigating, like trying to at least have more legitimate institutions and representatives in form of leaders, I think.
That's very important.
Yeah.
Dr. Abdullah.
Just three ways. I mean, when you go through the literature of project management, particularly project related to foreign aid or with the own budget of the country, three things I think would reveal in terms of inclusion of the NGOs, inclusion of the people. First, the consultative process before the commencement of the project. When you are having the feasibility study, try to have profound consultation with the stakeholders. So when you are engaged with them, that creates the avenue for future engagement that we call that project management committee in many examples. There are examples in Africa, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, even in Nepal. I know there are committees that work along with the government, experts, brokers, what you say, quote unquote. So the project management committee is another solution to this. And thirdly, what I was saying a moment ago, that when you develop the development result framework, that how would you measure the outcome of this project? And if those development indicators or development result frameworks indicators are agreed upon on the people you're working and also the stakeholders such as NGOs or implementing organizations, that could really pave the way of inclusion. And truly speaking, it reveals from the literature that increases the efficiency and effectiveness of development project when you involve the stakeholders.
So on this point, Dr. Abdullah, the role of donors, because most of the development work in our countries, it happens with their money. How do you see their appetite for accountability? How open they are to including, the communities in whose name that money is sort of, taken for various development projects. Their historical role has not been at par with the desired standards.
Exactly.
But now they are going big on that. How do you see, sharing a pertinent example from Pakistan, we know from our work that they have a lot of leverage on the governments which are taking money from them. Back in 2002, before rolling out a loan to Pakistan, the IMF ensured that the country would introduce the right to information in the country and sort of, do legislation around that. So because the government had to take money at that time, they did so. They complied with the requirement by introducing a presidential ordinance, sort of, and created the space for right to information. The civil sector organizations have built on that a lot, and now we have a fairly rigorous right to information, framework under which all 4 provinces they work. But coming back to that point, how much you have seen that donor community utilizes that that authority or that sort of say when the
In terms of accountability. You see, I think before I go on and give a specific response to that, I think understanding of the context is very important, even from African context or Bangladesh context. First of all, countries of less developed countries who are under the process of this disease, we always have the hunger to the aid and have the nature to say yes to all projects of the development partners because we have a shortage of budget. What happened by that? DPs always prefer to bring ideas of their own, and most of the time without consultation, due to the inability and lack of experiences in many areas. They take advantage of that, and they try to put flag or come to a project or are interested to project where they have expertise and they have international interest as defined in their yearly achievement target. What happened by that? You see, if you look at the sectors in Africa or Latin America or in South Asia, they always prefer the donor darling sectors such as education, health, environment. But what about the donor orphan sectors such as cross-cutting issues such as gender, the tribal issues and others? They're less interested. So we need to put the question first about the accountability of the development partners. That has been put in 2005 through the Paris Declaration, which we call the Paris Declaration of Aid Effectiveness, with the 5 principles: ownership, alignment, harmonization, mutual accountability, and the managing for result, which what we are discussing a moment ago.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the accountability of the development partner, previously the discourse was such that only the recipient should have accountability, not the development partner, not the donor. But it is important to make donor accountable. Unless until you make the donor accountable, you can't really develop the process. And when we are talking about the development result framework, there should be indicator for the donors as well to fulfill. Therefore, the Paris is a milestone conference trying to for these 5 principles that includes the donors' accountability as well. So I think there are examples now, countries like Bangladesh, we always argue with our development partner with the disclosure of information. That they commit a large sum of amount, but when it comes to, in reality, the disbursement is always less. They always impose consultants and they take away big bulk of money, rationally or many occasions irrationally. Then most of the aid is still tied and supply driven. You have to take equipment from certain countries, you have to accept a consultant, you have to accept experts. So by that way, the first issue arises with the donor, in fact, in terms of the accountability, whether they are giving the best product, whether they're supplying best consultant, whether they are bringing best expert in the projects. That creates huge challenge for the recipient. And yes, we know that Tide has taken different shapes over the year, but still it's a huge challenge. So I think the issue of accountability in terms of the management of the development project is 50%. 50% with the recipient and 50% with the development partner. Another thing is the due to the choice and preferences of the development partners or donors, aid always becomes fragmented. And then the challenge of harmonization is with the recipient, less capacity, less administrative abilities, but huge focus or many donors working in one single field, what we call donor proliferation or fragmented aid. And the only way you can, in fact, encounter that issue is the harmonization. Let have a few organizations. There's a USAID, World Bank, and IMF in infrastructure, JICA, KOICA, or maybe World Bank in education, but that never happened.
Yeah.
So donor always prefer to work in those, what I said, the donor learning sector, until unless this accountability framework and the issue of harmonization is not ensured. I think there will always be a question.
This is a very important point. And
accountability.
Makate,
Yes.
sorry if I could frame, I would really like you to throw light on it from community's perspective. There's a village in Pakistan, Sindh province, where not village, we can call it town probably, where there are more schools than the number of teachers that we have. All schools, because the chief minister at that time was very influential, and he thought that the biggest amount of kickbacks were coming in from the building school infrastructure, because all donors were loving in educational projects at that time. And they have not sort of, followed up with deploying as many teachers to sort of, really ensure that education is taking place in those schools. From looking at these, this aid concentration, mindless aid concentration, how do you look at it from community's perspective? Does it sort of, help build trust on the donor community and the government, sort of, or does it sort of, instigate conflicts within the community as a sort of takes away the entire trust of the government and those bodies? How do you look at it?
That would be unfortunate. Very interesting. So I think this is where you will actually employ resources where they're not needed. The implication is that there are still crises to be addressed, but then there's just not enough resourcing going into some of these areas, and then you'll just have structures that are unoccupied. Is there capacity for teachers? Is there a number, do you see that there's so many disconnects in something like that? Did you see that this was probably tabulated with someone who's not acquainted with the reality on the ground, and yet there were funds given, and this is then where you have, unfortunately, a waste of very much needed resources, because if they were directed in other areas of need, they would go a long way into addressing issues. So I think for me, it's really just getting away from a top-down approach where it's an expert. Experts perhaps are the people on the ground that know their problems and how they want to address them. And of course, then it's the resources where they need a helping hand from. And I think in what Prof was talking about, I really then am interested if, with the type of disconnect that we see between donor funding, development and aid darlings, what is it that they're not hearing from the ground? Because if you are having structures present in a community that doesn't need so many schools, what language have you communicated with them? And if there is a voice from them, even if it is silence, what are you hearing? Does it tally? Whatever it is that you have adopted to address an issue, do you think it was responding to a need on the ground? And if there is a disconnect, what are donors hearing? Because there has been issues of agency, accountability. Hence, we are not talking about donor accountability.
Exactly.
We know that they are there. We know that they have the funds. They are the main funders for most of our governments.
And the impunity with which they could sort of, misspend them,
yes,
big chunks of money,
So the challenge is that what is it that they're not hearing when this is what exists on the ground?
Yeah.
What language perhaps should we adopt for them to hear us?
I think it's a good example to fit in.
Sorry,
We have-
just let me rephrase, Is it a question of rephrasing the language? I mean, I think we are again throwing ourselves under the bus. Or is it donors' responsibility to sort of, be more amenable to that kind of feedback, be approachable for that kind of feedback, and sort of, be more accommodating of that kind of feedback, and show it in what ways they are doing it, showing that the willingness to be more accountable on the money that they are spending and the ways in which they are spending.
We have developed a mechanism in Bangladesh called local consultative group.
Yes.
Right. All the donors are the member of this local consultative group, and there is a joint chair one chair is Bangladesh and another chair is rotated among the donors. The idea to form this local consultative group was to make the aid more aligned to the development priorities, particularly, and to define the ownership. Because until unless donors have the attitude that I am giving you money, you are the recipient, and then you can't really do anything, regardless of the transparency, accountability, inclusion, anything. Donors are giving money, thank you, but most of the case, we repay the amount with certain interest.
Yes.
Countries like Bangladesh will be graduating in 2026. So mostly we'll be having the aid, not the grant. So we have to have our authority in terms of ownership. And secondly, they should come and fulfill and respect our development priorities, which is the principle of alignment. They should align their aid, their money to our development. A third mechanism can be the harmonization, what we said. And when we are talking about the harmonization, we have created another formation, that is working groups. So what we propose as a country to the development partners, that our economy is divided in 17 sectors. You choose the sector where you like to work, but you can't choose more than 3. So then you come and talk with us that I like to work in education, family planning, or in agriculture. And then it is harmonized. And we will then introduce, considering our development priority, that the approach should not be project-based, it should be program-based. This is our family planning program, this is our education program, you come and invest. If you take the example of successful aid utilization, we always name 3 countries. First of all, Korea, secondly, Singapore, and then, of course, India recently. And then Rwanda in Africa, they're doing marvelous when it comes to the utilization of aid. And they have introduced this kind of mechanism, local consultative group, working groups, and donors, they have to enlist in certain sectors, and they have to work in the program management system, not in project-based. By that way, you really encounter the project and aid for proliferation of the development partner. That helps you to make the donor accountable in many cases, and truly you can have impactful aid for your national development.
I think that's a very important point.
I think
Khatib.
we have a framework like that of the African Union. It's called NAPED, where
Yes.
there is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
priority framework for the continent, for its development aspirations. And when investors and donors come, they have to align their engagement with the continent with such a framework. So perhaps having a framework that stipulates your priorities, but equally not, I think, being in silos. If we all come together and maintain that this is the framework and our priorities are clearly stipulated in a document like this one. So if you're going to engage us, these are our terms. I think something like that will have a longer way to go.
Amazing.
But the
amazing.
issue is the political interest.
So,
Yes.
so
Geopolitics, regional interest.
Yes.
Countries like Pakistan, us, BRI, Quad.
I think that's
Free
very
and open
important.
Indo-Pacific.
That's very important. But probably that's a discussion for some other time. We are running out of time. I would really like to thank both of our panelists and the Bay of Bengal conversation this year. I think not including citizens and not making them the center of the development is a phenomenon due to which we see that the amount of monies that have been spent in the name of development does not correspond to the actual amount of development that has taken place. And if we really want to change that, Dr. Abdullah and Makhater both have shared the success stories, how successful countries have adopted their approaches towards a more citizen-focused, citizen-centered development. And I think that's the way to go if we really want to spend that money in a more responsible manner. Thank you so much.